Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park for tonight's tutorial on this lovely rainy evening. We're using the webinar version of Zoom, so you're in listening mode only currently, but I do encourage you to send any questions that you may have along the way. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A feature, and the chat is also open, and I will do my best to answer them as they come in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Amanda, and I've been with the library for a little over 3 years, and I enjoy all things pickled and hot sauced. So as part of the library's Seed to Table Garden to Harvest series, we thought it would be really fun to show you some ways to utilize your harvest or possibly some farm stand finds or even just produce from your local market in an easy and approachable way. Both quick pickling and fermenting are quick alternatives to canning, which can be an extensive process and is great certainly if you have an abundance of something. Whether you are prepping along the way with me or just taking notes, I just wanted to go over a few things to start. So to start, you do want to make sure that all of your mason jars and lids are thoroughly cleaned with hot soapy water or run through the dishwasher. Be sure to wash all your produce beforehand. Have all of your liquids and spices measured out. And for this particular tutorial, if you're doing it along with me, you will need a saucepan or two. So quick pickling, we will start with that. If you received a kit, we'll be using one of the 32-ounce mason jars. And that's also equal to like 2 pints, if you have those, for those of you at home, or just adjust to whatever you have available, of course. So why quick pickle? The process is simple. Very simple. It's also known as refrigerator pickles. It allows you to make quickly in advance, and they're ready to consume for weeks to come. Usually up to a month they last in your refrigerator, sometimes 2, depending on what you pickle. What can you pickle? You can pretty much pickle nearly any vegetable, fruit even. It just sort of depends on the vegetable and the cut as well. And then for sturdier things, heartier vegetables such as carrots, cauliflower, green beans, you may want to blanch them quickly prior to quick pickling, just for like 2 to 4 minutes, and then you would just shock them in an ice bath. But it's also not necessary. That's why quick pickling is so wonderful. It's kind of just personal preference. Okay, so to start, for the recipe, we are going to use equal parts liquid and then equal parts salt to sugar measurements. This is just kind of a really easy standard recipe, but you can feel free to play with it, whatever your personal preferences are again. So we're going to start with 1 cup of water and 1 cup of vinegar. And for quick pickling, typically the standard is, and actually pickling in general, if you were going to can, is distilled white vinegar. You can feel free to use things like apple cider vinegar. Rice wine vinegar is a good choice. Just try to stay away from anything that's too aged, like a balsamic. And then we're going to do 1 tablespoon of salt. I prefer kosher for pickling. You can use sea salt. You just have to adjust because the salinity level is pretty high. So again, we're going to start with the liquid, and we're just going to warm it really quickly to dissolve the salt. And if you prefer a sweeter pickle, then you would also add 1 tablespoon of sugar. So it's 1 tablespoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of sugar to 2 cups of liquid. And then for the 32-ounce jar, you'll likely need 1 to 1.5 pounds of produce. Today, I'm just going to do an easy easy pickle. I have these here, mini Persian cucumbers. I like these, and also something similar, an English cucumber for quick pickles, because they have kind of a thinner skin. And since you're not processing them like you would with a canning, it doesn't get as tough. So to start, we are going to warm your liquid and your salt. So it's, again, 1 cup of water, 1 cup of vinegar, and I've got 1 tablespoon of salt in here. I'm not going to add any sugar to mine, but again, that's just personal preference. And you're just doing this to dissolve. So you can actually kind of crank up the heat to move the process along a little quicker. And then you're going to take your mason jar and pack it with produce. So I'm doing, like I said, these mini cucumbers, and I'm actually going to just slice them. You can cut them into spears, depending on what vegetables you're using. Sometimes you can do like matchsticks if you were doing carrots. I pickle onions quite often. I actually have a jar of those in my fridge right now. Those are really wonderful for salads, to put on tacos. And you would, for those, you would actually leave the onion whole. Just start with a smaller onion, and you would just slice it into rings. Carrots are really great in matchsticks, just because they are a sturdier vegetable if you're not going to blanch them ahead of time. And so the idea is just to kind of stuff your jar up. If you were going to add any additions, spices, garlic, fresh herbs, I do recommend like 1 to 2 teaspoons spices. If you're going to use fresh herbs, today I'm just using some fresh dill. Just a few sprigs is fine, again, for this 32 ounce. You can also add some heat if you wanted to. So you could add fresh peppers, a couple of sliced fresh peppers, or crushed red pepper. And that's really, again, to your liking, however spicy you like it. The spices that do really well with pickling and are common are things like coriander, mustard seed. You could use dill seed. Any dried herbs are fine as well. Again, you're going to want to use kind of like a teaspoon or so, just because they're a lot more potent than fresh. Just get these to about, I'm not going too thin on them. But again, a lot of this is such personal preference, and you really can't screw it up. So just get these all in the jar, and you want to leave just about 1 inch of headspace. So here, I don't know if you can see that, but just about 1 inch at the top. I may actually just remove a couple of these. I'm going to put my dill in there. If you were going to add like garlic or even onion, just throw all that in there. And then as soon as this liquid is dissolved, the salt rather, and sugar, and actually it looks like it already is. You can actually use a funnel. I recommend, and this is why if you did bring a kit home, the wide mouth mason jars, it just makes everything so much easier. And then you just go ahead, pour the liquid over the top. You don't have to wait for it to cool down. You're going to wait. I have just a little over enough, which is perfect. So lid on, you're going to wait for this to come to room temperature though, before you put it in the fridge. And that is literally a quick pickle. It's in the name, is very quick and simple. I would give it 24 to 48 hours. I mean, you can go even longer before you consume it. The longer, the better. But again, it lasts for like a month in your fridge, which is wonderful. And it really doesn't matter what vegetable you use. It just matters kind of the way that you cut them, the size of them. Like, don't go too thin. If you were going to do something like a squash or something, don't go too thin. So that's it for the quick pickling. It's really super easy, and that's why I prefer it over canning. But again, I mean, if you have an abundance of produce, you know, tomatoes, that's a wonderful thing to can and make sauce, but it is so much more of a process. So this is easy peasy. So let's move on to fermenting. If you received a kit for this, we're going to use the other wide mouth mason jar. And wide mouth, I definitely highly recommend for anyone that can get a kit for the fermentation process. We're using this, what they call is a pickle pipe lid, the band that came around one of the other lids, and then you should have gotten also a Ziploc baggie filled with salt. So why ferment? Fermenting is a natural way to preserve foods. It also intensifies the flavor of something, and it creates and provides really beneficial bacteria, aka probiotics, which you would find in things like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi. It's also, again, much easier than canning, and it will keep in your fridge actually for up to a year, sometimes longer, depending on what you make. So how does it work? First, you start with creating a salty brine, and that allows for the fermentation process to start. By keeping everything submerged under the brine, it helps prevent the development of mold and creates a natural preservation. Having an airlock seal allows any pressure from gases that naturally release as the vegetables break down. Those will escape, and it also keeps harmful bacteria that you would get normally from oxygen out of the jar. So for the fermentation process, we are going to make hot sauce. You can also, just like with quick pickling, you can ferment nearly anything. Fruit and vegetables, it's really personal preference. I find hot sauce is really easy, and hot sauce just gets better with time. So we will start with that today. So for the brine, this is also a very simple standard brine. You're going to start with 2 cups of filtered water to 1 tablespoon of sea salt. And the salt, if you got a kit that you received, is I really recommend the Redmond's. Yeah, there's a flash. The Redmond's natural sea salt, and it's fine. Fine again, also just dissolves quicker. We're going to get this actually started because for fermenting, you actually want to cool that down to room temperature before you put it over your vegetables. That's really important. So we're starting with 2 cups of liquid to 1 tablespoon of salt. And I'm actually making a little bit more today because I'm going to show you a trick. A trick for weighing down your vegetables. There is glass fermentation weights that you can purchase online. Those are obviously the best route to go, but if you don't have those, which I do not, we're going to use a Ziploc baggie, and you're going to fill it with some of the extra brine, and that's going to help keep the vegetables submerged. And in the event there's a little pinhole leak, That's why we would use the brine. So again, it's 2 cups. Well, today I'm using 3 cups of filtered water and 1.5 tablespoons of sea salt. Just so you know, chlorinated water can mess with the fermentation process. And then the salinity level of sea salt is what helps in the preservation of fermentation. And then we're also going to use, because it is a 32-ounce jar, we're going to use 1 to 1.5 pounds of chili peppers, which I am going to get started on cutting. So for the chili peppers, I do recommend, if you can, using kind of a combo of hot and sweet or mild chili peppers. Today I have what was available at the local market, which was not a huge variety. So I've got a bunch of jalapeno peppers. I have 1 habanero, which provides kind of a little bit more of a sweetness, but the spice level is pretty high. And I have a poblano, which is a little bit smoky. You can really use whatever you want for this, whatever's available, whatever you've grown. You can remove the seeds or not remove the seeds. Most of you who signed on probably, if you're a fan of hot sauce and hot things, you know that the seeds and the membranes are what hold all of the heat in the peppers. But again, the fermentation process kind of slows things down and makes them a little more mild. So I leave them in. As far as chopping them, there's a little bit of a difference with this than with the quick pickling. You really want to pack this jar down because you don't want to allow for too much extra oxygen. So I am just taking off the tops of the peppers and slicing them pretty much. You could just have them if you want, but I'm trying to get it as much in there as I can. And then I also recommend, if you have gloves, which I do not currently have, probably it's a good idea to wear gloves when you're cutting this much chili pepper. Or just make sure you wash your hands heavily. So for additions to hot sauce, you can add anything that you flavor profile are hoping for. If you like something like a Caribbean hot sauce, so you want something a little bit sweeter, you can add things like natural sweeteners such as carrot, mango. You could do dried fruit. Oh, I forgot I have some serrano chilies in here as well. This is going to be spicy. You can also add garlic, onion, which I'm going to do today, and really just leave them whole or smash them. I just happen to have a really large clove. That's 1 clove of garlic cut. And again, you want to push it down, but not so much that you're smushing everything. You just want to get rid of some of the extra air pocket that might be created. I'm going to put like a half an onion in this, a very small onion. And then you can also add spices if you'd like. If you do want to add anything to your hot sauce to create a little bit of sweetness or a little more tang, I do recommend that you do it during the fermentation process, because that is actually what keeps it so long in your fridge. So if you were to add something after the fermentation process when you're blending everything, which I'll talk about in just a moment, that the fresh ingredients won't be fermented, and then it won't last nearly as long. So I do recommend anything other than the chili peppers that you want to add. You can add tomatillo, you could add cilantro. This is looking one serrano in there. Just waiting on that liquid. This is just nearly dissolved. Again, just make sure you're using sea salt preferably for this. Or again, you'll just have to adjust the amount that you use. If you use something like kosher salt, don't use iodized salt or, the table salt. That's looking very good. So for the fermenting process, it's sort of the same as the quick cooking, and you want to leave about 1 inch at the top there before you put your liquid in. And again, sort of pack it down. And I didn't add any herbs, but like I said, you can feel free to add herbs, spices, anything that you would like at this point in the process. But then after the fermentation process ends, you would blend anything that you want to add. If you don't do it now, you would add it then. This is going to, while I'm just waiting for this to basically cool down. And again, I did make a little extra so we can weigh this down if we need. We don't want any of this to come up above that liquid. And once we pour the liquid over it and put the weight on it, if there's anything floating at the top, if you put like fresh herbs or anything like that, you would want to remove that. So this part of the process is going to, once we get the liquid in there, we're going to put this pickle pipe on top, and then you're going to screw the band around it. And it's going to, excuse me, I just don't want to touch my face because I didn't wash my hands. Don't do that, it's a bad idea. You're going to let it sit on your counter or somewhere in a cool, dark place. You don't want it in direct sunlight. And it's going to sit for at least 7 to 10 days. If it's warmer, it's going to ferment quicker. So, which is fine. I think it's like 70 to 75 degrees is a really happy temperature for the environment, the fermentation process. If it's a little cooler, that's okay too. It's just going to be a slower process. So you're going to let that sit. I mean, you can ferment really truly as long as you want. The longer that you leave it, the kind of funkier and tangier it's going to get. But I found for my own personal preference, 7 to 10 days is usually, it gives it a really nice tang. So you're going to let it sit for 7 to 10 days or a little bit longer. And it's going to break down. The vegetables are going, or fruit, are going to naturally break down, and it's going to start getting cloudy, but that is normal. If you start to see film or anything developing on the top, that means that there wasn't, a tight seal created. If you don't have a pickle pipe, the other options are it's called an airlock lid. You can find those online as well. But some people also use things like cheesecloth or towel, like a clean, thin tea towel, or even like a double layer of paper towel and then a rubber band around the top. But sometimes if you go that route, you may have to what they call burp it. And it's just the process of, keep an eye on this no matter what. It's kind of like if you've ever done a sourdough starter, it's active. And there's natural gases that are created there from the breakdown of the produce. So you just want to keep an eye if you don't have one of these or the airlock lid that naturally releases anything that's developing in there. And that just means lift it quickly every couple of days and then close it again. See how this is doing. Still a little bit warm. So after the 7 to 10 days, you will actually take the fermented produce and you're going to strain it, and you're going to keep the brine because you're going to use the brine in your hot sauce. So depending on how liquidy you like your hot sauce, I mean, something like a Tabasco or any other kind of cayenne hot sauce is usually a little bit thinner. You're going to add, usually I start with about a half a cup of the brine and blend it with all of the contents in this jar. You're going to blend it in a high-powered blender until it's very smooth, and then add a little bit of brine as you go. And again, it's personal preference to kind of what thinness or thickness you would like. But at that point, after you blend everything, you are also going to add anything that, I mean, you're going to taste your hot sauce and maybe it needs a little more acidity. So you may want to add, I recommend like 1 to 2 tablespoons of vinegar. I like apple cider vinegar with hot sauces. You could also add citrus. Lime would be great if you're doing like tomatillo and cilantro. That's a nice flavor profile. And then you're also going to add any natural sweeteners. So things like honey, maple syrup are great additions. If you did add things like carrots or any kind of fruit to make it sweet, you may not need something like that. And then at that point, you can also then strain it again. And so if you strain it, of course, you're going to get a thinner hot sauce, but you also kind of lose some of that goodness, the good bacteria that's in the vegetables that you just spent time fermenting. And if you don't strain it, it's going to be a little bit thicker, kind of more like a sriracha type hot sauce. And it will settle always in the fridge. So you're just going to want to shake it up every time you use it. And you're just going to want to put it, if you reserved kits, you got a couple of these and it should fill, I think these are 5 ounces. And I think this recipe may make just slightly over that to fill 2 of these bottles. But no matter what you use, you just want to put your hot sauce in a glass. I highly recommend a glass storage bottle with an airtight lid. And at that point, it's going to stay in your fridge for a year, believe it or not, because you have just naturally preserved your vegetables and fruit with the salinity in the brine. So let's go ahead and put this liquid in here. You can use also a funnel if you need. You may need it for the Ziploc baggie to weigh it down. And again, I did go over the 2-cup. So just depending on your jar and the vegetables you're using, just kind of gauge how much you may need to weigh it down. You just have to mess with it. But the most important part of this process is truly just the brine and keeping everything in the jar submerged. And I'm just trying to get pretty much all of the air out of this baggie as well. So at this time, I'm just going to see if anyone has any questions at all. That is pretty much the fermentation process and the quick pickling process. And as you can see, they are both super easy and approachable, and it's fun. And you could really mess around with flavor combinations. There's lots of fun recipes online, things that you probably wouldn't naturally pair together, especially for hot sauces. But the coolest part about this is that it takes literally no time at all. And it stays in your fridge for so long. I'm going to show you guys, but I just want to make sure I'm not overfilling all the air out of this. I put just slightly too much in there. It's fine, just kind of gauge. You might have to mess with it a little bit. Again, the easiest route to go is the glass fermentation weight, which you can get online. But this is also a nice alternative if you don't have it. You just may have to fuss with it a little bit. It really is important to get everything covered. There we go. Okay, so there, as you can see, everything is submerged. This definitely weighs it down a bit, which is perfect. And again, if I happen to have a little pinhole leak, at least it's got the brine in it. And should you notice that for whatever reason you don't have enough liquid, you can always add more. But then you're just going to take this pickle pipe, put it on the top of the jar, and screw it tight. And then set it on your counter away from sunlight and keep an eye on it. In about 2 to 3 days, it's going to start, even maybe 2 days, it'll start to get pretty cloudy. And like I said, that's very natural, a normal part of the process. So don't be alarmed. And then again, after about a week, you can always taste a pepper and see if it's to your liking. If you've ever had anything fermented, it does have a little natural bit of a funk, but it's really meant to intensify the produce that you are using. Whereas typical hot sauces that aren't fermented are really relying on adding vinegar to preserve it. And this is really just such a nicer natural process that lets the peppers shine and anything that you add to it. So have fun with it. If you need any recommendations for flavor combinations, I'm happy to send them to you. You can certainly send me an email. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them my way about pickling or fermenting, hot sauce in general. I hope that I've helped you today. I really should wash my hands. But if nobody has any questions, no, it doesn't look like it. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, I really hope that I was able to show you how easy it's been 30 minutes and we did a pickling and a fermenting. And again, they're really not fussy. It's very approachable. If you, again, need any recommendations on additions or what type of produce or how to cut it, please feel free to send me an email, or if you have any additional questions that you don't think about at this moment, send me an email. I will send you a follow-up with this recording. So if you need to refer back to this at any point, and then I can also send you the exact recipe measurements if you'd like. Just let me know. But thank you so much again for joining me. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and get pickling. Good night, everyone.